Thanks so much. Welcome back. And I am joined today by Lisa Christensen for this session. Lisa's session is Next Gen Digital Learning, applying deliberate practice for real world impact. And Lisa is the Director of Learning Design and Innovation at McKinsey and Company. And not only is she in this role, but she's also the co-founder of McKinsey's Research and Innovation Learning Lab, which is translating academic research into cutting edge learning practices. Lisa leads and develops a global team of design experts, and she's also the author of several articles on intentional learning. So really great to have you here, Lisa, and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation. Let me just give you a tiny bit of my context so that you'll understand kind of where I'm coming from and what I hope to accomplish with you today. So I sit in a really unique role where I have a foot in today and a foot in tomorrow. So as Carolyn said, my team builds all of the learning that we offer here at the firm, as well as I run the research and innovation function. And so I am constantly thinking about where is learning going? What do we need to be doing differently? How can we push ourselves from a technology perspective? And what are some of the things that we might do to really move our industry into tomorrow? So what I'd love to talk with you all about today is one way that we're doing that. A skills practice strategy that we are using at McKinsey to help us start to really think about whether or not we are using our learning effectively to move people forward in their skill progression. All right, so I'm going to share with you, I love this frame, this pace of change framework. This will probably feel, I hope, really true to you, which is that the pace of technology is changing faster than our organizations are changing. You're probably feeling that tension every day. And that gap that it creates is something that we can uniquely help to fill. Right? So as we think about what kinds of skills do people need to help our organizations catch up to the way that technology is changing? And one of the things that we've discovered a couple of years ago is, well, we just don't have a great way to measure people's skills. We don't have a great way to know what their proficiency is, how they're progressing, whether or not our learning programs are as effective as they could be. And so we set out to build a strategy that would help us do just that. I am a big proponent of science and baking things into the science. And so we started with something that hopefully you're familiar with, which is a theory called deliberate practice. So I'm going to challenge your orthodoxy for a second and say that expert performance, the research tells us, doesn't just automatically develop because you spend a lot of time. Expert performance develops because of how you use the time that you are investing. And so this kind of circle that you see in the middle here are things that we have built into some of our digital learnings. They're the new standard for what we build into our digital learning so that we can say that learning is moving our folks towards more expert performance. Hopefully you're familiar with the term called the zone of proximal development. Sometimes we talk about it as the Goldilocks zone. It is that sweet spot where you're doing exactly the right kind of complexity of practice to move your skills forward. And so I'm going to show you a couple of examples today of some things that we have been building that help us kind of move people into this zone of proximal development and adjust their skills. Before I get to the example, one of the big things that we have really thought a lot about is the data. How are we contributing to the data environment? So let me put this on the screen for you for a second and show you a little bit about the people development ecosystem, the data that we are working with inside our organization. You can see down the left there a number of big buckets. Let's start at the bottom actually and work our way up. So we are an organization that does a lot of really rich surveying. So we have a lot of really great survey data. We are very focused in this organization on evaluation and performance review. And so we have a lot of data coming out of our annual review process. And we also have an internal process where all of our consulting colleagues basically get a little progress check every 2 weeks. That progress check is something we call an EPR, and that has now been digitized. So that is all now digital data that we can use to understand how people are, how their skills are evolving on their projects. Well, when we looked around in the ecosystem, we said the only kind of data that we as learning are contributing is like completions and value for time spent and the hours that people have dedicated to something. That's not really data that's helping us understand our skills-based ecosystem at all. And so we've set out to create a new kind of data, learning practice data or skills practice data that we can contribute into this data ecosystem. And so what we get and what we're starting to see, which is super exciting in our organization, is that we've got a richer set of data points now that tell us about people's performance across different contexts, on the job and in learning evaluations, and then learning offerings, and then we can look at that against all of our people survey data and start to make some insights about what do people need. Those insights can help us shape strategic priorities in different part of the organization. And then we can take action on those priorities. And then we kind of create this virtuous loop that really helps us understand how people are progressing and developing. So to get to that, we've had to lay a lot of railroad tracks down. And I want to show you some of those railroad tracks today. So I'm going to focus today on kind of this second pillar, right? We have to have a skills fact base, and we need that development ecosystem for this to matter. But in order to actually create deliberate practice experiences, we've had to spend a lot of time building our institutional capability to do that. And that has looked like building a design methodology, investing in some development tools that let us build new kinds of learning experiences, and really upskilling our professionals. I'm going to walk you through the example today in the steps that I have been teaching folks on our team. So this is how we have been teaching designers to think about building an experience like this that will give the individual learner practice in that zone of proximal development, that will create individualized feedback for them, and that will create structured data for us as an organization. All right, little bit of an eye chart, but you're going to see it a couple of times, and we're going to just move along this process together. So again, if you put yourself into the shoes of one of the designers on my team, this is what we are encouraging you and asking you to think about doing as you're building these practice experiences. So the first thing, right? Go out and look at the data in the ecosystem and understand what are the core skill gaps. What should we actually be trying to move people along? Where are the skills that they need some more support on? We brought this strategy first to a skill surge that we were doing on feedback, giving and receiving feedback. And originally, a lot of our stakeholders said, well, we just need to tell people more about feedback. And we're like, we actually don't think that's true. We think that they actually know a lot about feedback, but there are some complexities to giving it. Right? There are some complexities to our environment that make it more challenging to talk openly with one another. Let's work on those behaviors, right? So then we work to really define the behaviors that we are trying to move, right? I'm going to show you a really detailed example. This kind of top level categories, driving for actionable feedback and building meaningful connection. Those are the skills that we discovered in our needs analysis are the things that people are having a hard time doing. And how do they then do those skills? Well, if I want to give somebody actionable feedback, I need to build on their strengths. I need to be really clear and specific. I need to be future focused, and I need to be direct and honest. Those are the things that I want to measure. That is the data that I want to create. And I want to be able to roll that up to give an indication of the efficacy of people's skills, right? So spending some real time here, really thinking about what the skills are and how those skills show up, and knowing that then this becomes the frame for what we're going to measure in the organization. Then I spend a little bit of time, or a lot of time actually, thinking about how to design an interaction where people can apply those behaviors. I'm going to stay with this giving and receiving feedback example for a second, because I think it's a really straightforward one to understand. But you can imagine that there are so many ways to practice. We're going to look at a conversation practice today, but you can also build a deliverable and get feedback on it. You can model an expert's performance or evaluate somebody else's work. There's lots and lots of ways to practice. We're going to look at a really straightforward one today. So what we set out to do is design some conversations that would be really challenging for people to have, and that would create a bunch of the different dynamics that we need to get them to start giving that actionable feedback. And we built that into a simulation platform that lets them practice. So this is an early prototype. What it looks like today has evolved quite a bit, but this is one of our very first prototypes. And so in this experiment, you're having a conversation with Samuel, and he is quite challenged about the way his team is working. He just feels like he's doing more work than anybody else on the team, and he's really quite frustrated. Now you can see a number of things on the screen. This is a scripted branching simulation, and so there are different choices you can make, and you can optimize. Hopefully you hit the optimal path, but behind each of these is a measurement structure that rolls back up to those skills that I showed you a moment ago. And you can see then that as I make choices, if I am choosing that optimal path, my scoring is going up in the background. If I'm choosing a suboptimal path, my scoring is going down. But the fact that all of my choices are ticked and tied to that rubric that we have built gives us a way to start structuring that data in the back end. So again, this is probably something that you feel really familiar with. This isn't a particularly new concept, but the idea of structuring the data really, really clearly is helpful. I will tell you that in the current iteration of this, it is actually generated. It's no longer branching. It is generated by an AI agent, and it is a free-form dialogue. So in the current version, they're no longer making choices between the branching simulation. We've now moved into an era where they're actually just having a conversation, and this structuring in the background that we did in the early prototype is helping guide the data and the metrics. One of the things that became really, really important in this is thinking about how to get people to do this a number of times. Practice means doing something multiple times, not just once. And so what could we do to encourage them to repeat the performance, to play over and over and over again? And so we played with a bunch of different gamification techniques. We worked on scoring and replay approaches to help encourage them to do that. And we landed on a few deceptively simple things, right? So this is a similar screenshot to what you saw before. I call your attention to the green battle text, clear and specific. So again, reinforcing that skill that I'm trying to build in you. You will know immediately whether you're doing it well or not. It will be visual, it will be color coded, and then it's going to fly up into the corner where I see actionable feedback and meaningful connection, those two skills that I am trying to build. And I'm going to see it drop in there and either increase my score or decrease my score. So there are a lot of very subtle, like visual cues that I'm on the right track or I'm not. And then you can see that I'm building stars, right? I am moving forward towards a better score as I progress through the simulation. And then when I land at the end, there is really rich individualized feedback for me. That replay is really important. The other thing that was really important was thinking about, what do we do with this offering? Where do we put it? How do we get people to do it? We work in an organization that's entirely self-paced, and so nobody has to do anything. And so we built this in a number of different ways to try different strategies. The thing that worked the best was, not surprisingly, pinning it to a live offering. So this has become the pre-work to a workshop that people go to about, and for one of their transitions, transitioning into a project leader. And the faculty members in the the course use the data that comes out of this to customize what they teach in that session to the needs of that cohort. So if everyone in that session is doing really, really well with being direct and honest, but they really do not seem to understand strengths-based coaching, then they spend more time on strengths-based coaching and really work to tailor what they're doing in that session based on the outputs of this. Now, we're doing some really interesting things now to kind of move into more digital-only spaces, and we're seeing some progress in that. But that early win of getting people to use this thing and then see the impact of using that data in a live environment was really, really helpful for us to get started. The last piece is really for us to generate insights from the learner performance data. I'm going to show you an example, kind of a sanitized example of the data. You can see how we structured. We structured first playthrough and best playthrough. And against each of those skills that we're trying to develop, we give them an aggregate score. So this is the whole cohort that went through the program all together. So maybe these are the scores of 40 people aggregated up. And you can see where this cohort was the first time they played and how they have progressed as a result of the experience. We don't do last playthrough, we do best playthrough, because again, it isn't important to me to know what they did the last time. I want to understand what was the best moment in that repeat play. We are seeing people play this somewhere between 2 and about 5 times, depending on how they score. And we're actually seeing people do a lot of purposeful failure. So they are making choices that they know are not right to see what will happen. Another reason to go for best playthrough. And that's been really interesting to watch those patterns in the data, to see people doing really well, trying really hard, then exploring some different options, seeing what happens when they make a suboptimal choice, trying to recover from it. The data patterns have been really fascinating. And then the last thing that feels really important, and this is, I think, an important part of moving us into the future. We have to loop those insights back into our development ecosystem. This can't just stay in learning. This isn't just a learning thing. We have to be able to go back to the people organization and say, here's how people's skills are developing as a result of something that they are experiencing and learning. Again, a bit of an eye chart, but this is a sanitized version of a dashboard that we use internally to measure the health of our feedback culture. And you can see that skill building right there at the top is one of the things that we measure. How skilled are colleagues? We are contributing to that data ecosystem with some of the data that we're generating out of some of our new simulation-based experiences. And then we're seeing the impact of those things on real-world outcomes at the bottom. What are people's feedback experience overall, right? What is the frequency with which they're giving feedback? What's the quality of that feedback? And we're able to take now populations that have been through some of our deliberate practice experiences and look at whether or not they are doing better on these outcomes versus folks who haven't gone through those practice experiences. So it's giving us a really incredible new way to think about whether or not our learning is working, right? We're trying to move beyond happiness and completion and value for time spent into actual data that says this thing's working or it's not, and it's letting us adjust. All right, I'm going to pause there. I think that is a helpful place to stop and maybe talk about what some of your questions are about this strategy and what we've been learning. And hopefully we get Carolyn back here in a moment.
I am back. Hi, Lisa. Great to see you. Thank you so much for a great discussion. We have Cody. Cody is asking, does your design approach change if the learning experience is geared to hard skills as opposed to soft skills? Are there any pitfalls a designer might fall into when gathering data from technical trainings?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think conceptually, it is very, very similar, right? We've showed a really like simple and accessible example here of a conversation. But you can imagine we do a lot of deep technical training in our organization. So let's talk about the skill of financial modeling for a second, right? I can get participants to actually build different components of a financial model. And we now are working with some AI agents that help give them feedback on those financial models that they're building. So I think conceptually, we've worked really hard to make those 7 design steps something that will apply regardless of the type of skill. I think the one thing that I would caution us all, whether it's hard skills or soft skills, is as you're working with subject matter experts and thinking about like, what is the nature of the feedback that you need to give people? It's really hard sometimes for experts to unpack their own bias, to remember what it was like at the beginning. So it can be very easy to just pack a whole bunch of stuff into one of these experiences. And we're trying to be right in the zone of what's hard and what they're capable of, and move them just ahead a little bit. And so kind of working with SMEs to tailor what they are trying to teach in different practice experiences, I think is one of the things we really watch out for as designers.
That's really, really great, Lisa. Thank you. And how do you think deliberate practice will bridge us into the future of learning?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. If I think about where I believe learning is going, where as an organization we believe learning is going, we are starting to see the merger of work and learning. So I think over the next few years, you're going to see learning being much less of a go away and do, right? Much less of a taking out of the workflow and going somewhere else. I think there will always be a place for that, for sure. But when you think about skills and building your skills, where's the best place to do that? That is in the work itself. And so if I'm going to support that, I need to understand how that works. I need to understand what people are doing. I need to understand what I need to do to support them. And so I feel like one of the things that we are excited about right now is that we are bridging where we're at today with where we think we'll be tomorrow. And we're teaching people to our design team, our learning teams, our people analytics teams. We're teaching them how to think about the work in terms of breaking down into skills, not into what we want to tell people, but into the things they need to practice and how they'll do that, really understanding workflows. And I think that will be a really important capability for learning professionals as we move into a world where learning and work are likely to be much, much closer together.
Thank you, Lisa. And if you're in an environment where you've got to build a case for deliberate practice, what are your tips and suggestions for colleagues here today?
Yeah, interesting. So I think there is something really powerful about that skills data. When you go out and talk to stakeholders about the quality of learning programs, and all you're able to say to them is, people really enjoy this program. They find it very valuable. That is a really great indicator about the health of your product, but it doesn't tell us anything really about the skillfulness of people. And that data, that behavior data, has been very, very compelling to our stakeholders. So I think that there are some interesting things that we can be doing to say, would it be valuable if you understood how skilled people were on these kinds of behaviors? Would it be valuable to look at that in different populations, to contrast their different experiences? And so I find that trying to build a case for this has really been a lot easier when we talk about the nature of the data and the kinds of insights that we might be able to provide to different stakeholders as a result of investing in efforts like this.
No, hugely helpful, Lisa. Thank you. And with regards to the use of avatars, and we've looked at obviously the way in which you've come through your journey, and it feels like we're at a point where we're able to understand quite a comprehensive route that you've taken. What have been the points, the learning points, or the bits that didn't go so well that you had to kind of
Oh, yeah.
revisit and to perhaps help us kind of have a look at some of the other bits of your journey that we haven't covered today?
No, that's a great point. There's always things that don't go well, right? I mean, I'm showing you some screen captures of our earliest prototypes. They're not that beautiful. They are just but they're a great example of a starting point, right? I think one of the things that has been challenging is to think about how do you meet the dual need? An individual needs to get feedback. But also I'm trying to move into a new kind of data that we structure for an organization. Turns out that there's a lot of tension in those two things, especially as we've moved into the space of AI agents. The AI agent being able to give both really specific individualized feedback, but then pull up for me and give me structured organizational insights, that's been very challenging to figure out. And so that has been a really fun part of the process. And we've had lots of failures in our pilots where it's giving people like it's giving people the most insane feedback that's at very high level, or it's giving us the super, super granular structured details. So it's trying to like bridge that tension and think about, are we measuring the right behaviors? Are we actually talking about behaviors? Are we talking about things people can see and observe and do? That like working to sort of turn this into something we've always done, which is simulation design is not new. Practice design is not new, but trying to get structured data out of it, that is pretty different. And there have been a lot of failures in that process.
No, but I love it because you're sort of mentioning bias, I guess, as we're coding and we're programming and we're uploading knowledge and training kind of, sort of the generative AI or the, sort of interactive AI. There's a lot of that learning, I guess, across the way, which is where some of those disparities came in.
There is, and I think it was interesting to start in a place that's very branching, right? To use a tool that really lets you just create a very classic branching simulation. We got to learn a lot about and the reason we chose to start there is because we got to learn a lot about the data and how to think about the data. As we've moved into more agent-based work and having free-form dialogues with a Gen AI agent, it's been really interesting to think about, like, how do you shift your design and what you do? You're no longer scripting any of the work. You are training the agent. And so so far it hasn't been any less time consuming in terms of the designer. But it has really been interesting to think about what you do differently as a designer, because you're no longer scripting out the perfect optimal path. And so there's a lot of new, interesting nuance in how to think about the scoring, how to think about like the feedback for the person. It's a really exciting challenge to move out of branching and into agentic sims.
This is wonderful, Lisa. Thank you. And I think just one final question. You think about yourself a year ago. What's your big tip for everybody now that you've sort of come through this year and you would have told yourself a year ago if you could have done, if you can go back in time? What might you have said?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because I was with a group of pharmaceutical executives earlier this week, and we were having a version of this conversation about how to bring more practice work into some of their learning. And their response was very much where I felt like I was a year ago, which is, I don't know if I have any of the right tools. Like, I'm not sure I see where I want it to be, and I feel a little bit like I'm working with one arm tied behind my back, because I don't know if I have everything I need to really bring this to life. And my advice to them and my advice to my old self would have been, you just start with what you have and you push yourself to the boundary of what that technology is capable of what your team is capable of. You go right up to the edge and make as much progress as you can. And when the tool no longer works or supports you, then you work on pivoting. But if we wait until we have every perfect tool, we know everything about the skills practice in the background, I fear we will never get there, right? And so nobody's going to need us to tell them anything in a few years. They're going to have so much access in the flow that we're at the moment of bridging ourselves into that new world. And I think I think you just have to start, right? With whatever your limitations are right now, you have to push yourself to the edge of those limitations.
Lisa, thank you so much for those wise words and for fitting so much in such a short amount of time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think I speak for everybody here on just how much we've got to think about now as we come away from your session. So a huge thank you